Screen.
I just realized I wasn't recording too, so I'm now officially recording.
I don't think that's going to work for me. I'm just going to mail this out.
Okay, and I actually think I found the correct one, so I'm going to try sharing again.
Okay. Let me just get the rest of this email done.
Yeah, it says group notes 032621.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, and it starts with the goal is allow for the of housing to meet the needs of our local population now and for at least the next 10 years. And then
Yes.
for who it's a development that serves the needs of our local population through commercial and residential housing.
Correct.
And then it says consider overlay districts or zoning modifications. Okay, so this is the correct one. So it's on the screen now. And where do you want to go now, May? You want me to go farther down?
Let me just get Ron onto this email, and that way I'll know we've got dual capability here. Sorry, guys.
No, that's okay. I mean, you're talking to a computer geek here too, so.
Okay, now I see it. Yes, now we've shared the document. So yeah, let's go on to the how, because I think we've kind of covered the what and when. So going through the how again, public input, I already read. We revisit code revisions, such as RV parking. Then again, update and adopt local building codes for alternative housing. Next one is meet goals for housing through affordable housing incentives and options, code updates and IGA agreements. And then the next one, base sewer and water tap fees on the square footage of the housing unit. Allow for amortized tap fees for low budget projects. Another point, clarify in code what constitutes a dwelling unit. And then revisit the ADU and STR ordinances. Determine if they have had the desired effect of creating affordable housing, as well as any cost advantage or disadvantage that has resulted. I guess we could add on that and tweak it if we need to, but I guess that goes without being said. Next point, adopt incentives for developers to build affordable housing. For example, density increase in exchange for a percentage of affordable units, a tiny home park, etc. Explore incentives to builders who offer a percentage of housing under a flex rent schedule. Find ways to monitor and ensure that incentivized housing is meeting stated goals. Explore the creation of a Netherland Housing Trust. Establish a timeline and follow it. And then finally, we're out of how and on to why. To provide an opportunity for housing with dignity and a positive future for our residents. And finally, where? Explore our options. So I don't have any numbers in this because I think that we're going to get caught on that. So I tried to cover that through the code portions of the how, also the idea of annexation. So tell me,
May, this is Karen. Where are you using like attachment stuff? I do see consider the tax and utilities burden on seniors who are aging in place and own their home.
I tried to put that in. I put in under how meet goals for housing through affordable housing incentives and options. I did leave off the percentages that she had suggested just because I couldn't get a clear read from Ron and Kayla if that was doable and for how long. And again, I don't want to get snagged up on that. I think people in general agree that incentives are necessary We
Mhm.
need to determine what those are. Then I also added from her thing, the her comments, the creation of a Netherland Housing Trust.
Okay.
And I also felt that she was in favor of the finding ways to monitor and ensure that incentivized housing is meeting stated goals. I thought she supported the concept right above that of flexible rent. And then above that is another one for affordable housing, density increase in exchange for percentage of affordable units, tiny home park, etc. So I did try to work all of that in.
Cool.
Um,
Cool. Yeah. Seeing as you're calling it out, I'm seeing that. And one of the things you guys can do tonight, I mean, it's up to you, of course. I mean, you could finalize this and be done, or you could get it pretty close and then you could, email each other, put Tasha on it and give you guys the weekend to kind of look at it and tweak it, and then got an opportunity too, because we don't need it until the end of the day, I believe.
yeah. No, I'd love
Just
to
some
get
thoughts.
her final approval on it. I hope that she hasn't been ill the whole week. I know she said she wasn't feeling good last week. But I know this is it's a challenging thing.
Yeah, and
To go through these meetings.
she's very passionate about it, that's for sure. Like all of you
Yeah,
are.
and we are, and I think that if we don't assign numbers, most of the stuff that she said, the only thing I didn't go along with, and we can put this in, although I think it's a no-brainer, is that some affordable units should follow the building code for handicapped.
They
And I'm
all
all
have
for
to.
that.
They're all required to. ADA code is across the board.
Okay.
Your
For
building,
you.
it's well, and actually, if you were going to go into old building and just do some reconstruction or add on a certain amount of square footage or whatever, you'd have to bring it all up to ADA code.
But Karen, there really is a difference, though, if you're talking about ADA code and actually building a unit that is for a specific handicapped. For instance, I know the doors need to
Absolutely.
be
Yep.
wide enough, obviously, for wheelchairs to get in and out, and the way the doors open in or out of a building. But counters being lower, bathrooms having, handicapped toilets and showers that are
Sure.
accessible to people in wheelchairs. And I mean, so you would have to
So
do
that's a
that
different,
as
Kayla,
a special needs
that's a
build.
different standard. Yeah, right. So if you're gonna have a different product, right, you're not gonna just build a resident that anybody could use, whatever. You're gonna be focused and targeted for people with disabilities. That's a whole different ballgame. And you're right, but are you saying that the goals or the objectives should say a certain amount of the housing inventory meets the needs of people with disabilities? Because that's the language I suggest using, rather than trying to go down into the weeds and figure out, well, what exactly does that mean? Because that's really up to the experts. If somebody's building, yeah.
We could put that under who as, ensure that housing that is,
Well,
I think it's up to
I think the word ensure locks you in. I think the word
it does.
sensitive would be a good word. We're sensitive we will be sensitive to the needs of our handicapped community or residents or whatever. To be sensitive
People living
to
with disabilities.
If you say,
maybe we should put it as a bullet point: strive to provide housing for people with disabilities. mean, nobody would argue with that, right?
Right? Nobody's,
Although, I mean, because we're not saying the town of Netherland is gonna provide it, so maybe,
provide
explore,
incentives,
provide
provide
incentives
incentives for
and
developers
search
to
for partners.
include, or just say,
Yeah,
and
see, I
that,
think that's
that you
the
could
way to
also,
do it. I think if you, I think if you have a handicapped person in the community that you know what their specific needs are, and you're getting ready to build a project, that's where you can have that conversation between the two parties to say, if you incentivize me as a builder, I will be sensitive to your needs, and we can readjust our building standard for this particular unit or whatever, ground floor, blah, 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 that suits your specific handicap needs. But there needs to be an incentive, otherwise nobody's going to do that. They're just, I mean, unless it's a friend that you're doing it for, you're not, I can't see that you would just arbitrarily go out and build something that would suit that kind of a disability unless you know that somebody specifically is going to go into it.
well, and May
Does that
was
make
going
sense?
down the right road too, where you'd almost want two objectives or whatever, one incentivizing developers to create livable spaces for people living with disabilities, and then also develop private-public relationships or partnerships for developers to create, whatever you want to say, whether it's, housing,
Special needs housing.
special needs housing, housing for the elderly, whatever.
So, Karen, I like that first sentence. Can you remember what you just said?
Provide incentives for developers to create livable spaces for people living with disabilities.
I think
Okay,
that's great.
so would that be under who?
I think that's the what, and then the who could be develop public-private partnerships with the goal of creating, or with the intention of creating housing for special needs. So that would be the who, right? Because you're gonna end up having to partner on it, most likely, and it's usually a public-private partnership.
So encourage, is that, how did you say it? Encourage public?
I said develop public-private partnerships with the intention of designing and building space for special needs population or something like that. And that could include the elderly. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, develop public-private partnerships to design and provide livable space for the elderly and special needs and those living with disabilities. Okay. All right, I've got those two. So under who, I put under consider the tax and utilities burden on seniors who are aging in place. I added develop public-private partnerships to design and provide livable space for the elderly and those living with disabilities. Or we could, and we've left out families with children, but we can leave it at that because we want to focus on that. And then under
You
what?
could say low income if you wanted to, which is across all spectrums, right? That could be
Yeah.
family, it could be individuals, elderly couples, it could be a variety.
Okay. And I'll send all this, I'll send this right out to everybody after the meeting. But I think Otoshna is gonna like that. So then, do we want to leave in? Well, then provide incentives for developers to develop livable space for those living with disabilities. We can probably tie that in to under how, where we talked about incentives. Which I have adopt incentive for
Could you,
developers to build affordable housing and special needs housing. How about that?
I
We
don't think
put
you
it,
need it in both places.
Ron,
I mean,
Ron, are you trying to speak? Sounds like you're off mute. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I was trying to speak. When you were talking the incentive I think you should give an example and say incentives like increasing the density and increasing the height limit. You got to have some space to put these people. And that's the only place where there is any space is increased height, particularly in a CBD.
yeah, I thought I had that CBD thing. I've got that under how, the very first one, Ron, I talk about vertical development. Because I think that's something where we need to start with the public input and then go from there. And then I talk about the density increase. So that's kind of the same thing. So I
Well,
think twice.
vertical development doesn't mean the same thing, I don't think, as actually in our instance in this town and its ordinances as increasing the height limit. I'd sure like to see it put increase the height limit as a specific incentive.
Okay, increase height limit in CBD. Home park. And then we want to make sure we have it all in there. Okay. All right. You can't see it, Ron, but I added that to the line you wanted it on.
did you put it under how, May?
Yeah.
So you basically said get public input by a vote if necessary on preferences for annexation, vertical development in CBD infill, increasing height and density. Is that increasing height and density or density and height?
Yes, both.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's just one word or two words. And
Okay,
height.
height and or density. Yeah.
No, both words.
Height and
Okay.
density, and then overlay districts.
Well, okay. All right. Got it. Does that suit you, Ron?
Yeah, it certainly does.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else, Ron, while you got your speaker on?
No, man, I think that's a pretty good job. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. All right, Kayla, what you got?
I think it's good. I think a lot of this is going to be fleshed out in the charrettes, and I would be really interested in seeing how what we've come up with is tweaked or modified or left alone by the people that are in the other groups. But I think it's a pretty darn good document so far. Basing, I was thinking about this the other night, and I was going, okay, now what really? How are we going to go about doing all of these things we want to do? And a large portion of it has to do with changing codes in our town. So we really have to make sure that we put a fire underneath, that this is something that the board will prioritize. And, because, we can suggest all these things, but unless they're put in writing and become part of our legal document for our town, there's no teeth in this. So these things have to be codified by our town board. And I don't know if we need to put a statement in there about, because this is a wish list right now. We've had wish lists for 30 years. We need to have an actionable piece of paper here. And the only way we're going to do that is by putting these things in. They have to be code modified. And the only way we do that is by getting action from the town board. So, and in my case, specifically working with and the IGA that is coming up with Boulder County, that's a biggie. So to me, those are the two hurdles to making this document be more than just a piece of paper. But I love what we said.
Well, I certainly agree with you, Kayla, and it's the committee that comes in at about 3 a.m. in my house. It's like, how are you going to put teeth into it? I think the established a timeline is the key to this. And I guess Miranda and Karen, maybe you can clarify. But what I'm thinking is, once we get these basic concepts through the charrettes, then would it be appropriate to start to try to establish a timeline?
So that is the strategic planning flow, to your point. It's actually just to get feedback on goals and objectives, and then you do your very specific measurable targets, including timeframes, in May. So I don't think you want to start on that now, because if the public doesn't, maybe they want to modify a goal, you don't want to be spending time doing a time frame for something you may not move forward with.
Exactly. Maybe then what we need to do is I'm not quite sure how we're going to evaluate the input that we're getting from the charrettes, but because we don't know what that input is going to be, I guess it's hard to know how we're going to evaluate it. So.
Well, I think that's a public process too. I think that people are going to read this and they're going to go, "Oh yeah, that's great. I agree with that. That's terrific." Or, "I don't like that part. Take that out." Or, add this. Have you ever thought of this? And then when you go to the town board, they will have a process of, do people like this? Do they not like this? Are we going to, when can we start? Because that's a lot to ask. It's a lot to ask town staff and the attorney for the town to make sure that everything they're putting in there can legally be done. So, there are steps, but that's my point. How do we make sure that this doesn't just become a piece of paper that we put a great big one of them up in the, the community center up there and go, "Oh yeah, look, we wanted to do this for 2030. And no, we actually have rules and laws and code that will accompany people who are setting about trying to accomplish these things, so that there has to be that meat behind it. But I think that it's a process. And you're saying, I don't think we can put, like Miranda said, I don't think we can put an exact timeline on this yet. But I think each step that we go through gets us closer to that goal.
So I have a question for Karen and Miranda. Let's say that we get the public feedback and we, put a star next to a couple of them and X out a couple of them, and we revise our list and then we start working on the timeline, and then we have the public charrettes on that, right?
Correct. I
And
mean,
then-
yes and no. It's not nearly as in depth as these charrettes because now you've already gotten buy-in from the goals. It's just now mapping out what the next 10 years will look like for that.
Okay, and so when it comes to the teeth, let's say that the housing committee comes up with a timeline. You know, this is what we want the voters to consider a couple of these ideas that are out there and have been for a while, so that the town board will have direction. And, you know, there might even be questions of, you know, start times and such as that, stuff like that, that we would ask the voters to orient our town board. And I suppose once that's done, it'll move from there, because my feeling is that if we don't have some real strong markers for the board, you know, stuff goes on year after year after year. And I think once we get a vote, but I guess the question is, what if the board says, well, we like your timeline, but we've got a great public engagement process and we're going to do it on our own time?
So-
They can do that, right?
Yeah, but well, before we actually started Envision, we talked with the board about this. And so what will happen, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is once the board adopts the action plan, then the timeline is set. And then annually, every June, they will evaluate the timeline and the goals just to see if life has changed and any sort of adjustments should be made. Now, if there were adjustments, though, it would go right back into the vetting process. So it's more just to make sure we don't make a document and then don't revisit it until 2030. There will be purposeful meetings dedicated to just assessing how we are doing on our goals.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking? Am I answering that correctly? I'm hoping I.
No,
Miranda, what is the process though for adding to or changing code? What are the steps and how laborious is that?
So, I mean, like right now we're in the process of doing like a subdivision ordinance update. And so usually it's going to be tasked with whichever board aligns most, or it may not be, maybe on staff. But there's a series of public hearings that go into any sort of change to the municipal code.
And then there's also a public notice requirement, and I mean, there's a lot of rules around it.
Right, and
But
that's what I'm saying, that those are all the steps that.
It can happen quickly, though. Correct? I mean, I've seen the town move like lightning, and they've been on this for quite a while. I mean, they're working on revision to the building code right now, which would be an obvious thing, you know, to get involved with right away. But so that's,
you know, a lot of it may just depends on all the work that's gone in the background. So for instance, like with the building code updates, we have an administrative team that includes like Rick Henriksen from the fire department and members of Safe Built and town staff. And so we're reviewing all of it and trying to do as much of the background work as we can. And then we're regurgitating it back to all the boards and commissions and all these public meetings. So that's a pretty large kind of change to code. And then sometimes there's very small changes to code, you know, tweaking some things here or there. So it really depends on the scope of the language that's being changed and whether or not, I mean, when things move super fast, it's usually because it's an emergency. Like we've got something that in the code that doesn't align with the statutory language, which was changed 3 years ago, and we have to change it now because, you know, it's going into effect or something like that. But for the most part, I would say the board tries to stay away from that. They try to make it so that, you know, for something like this with affordable housing, for instance, I mean, Miranda and I can tell you, they're definitely going to want to involve the Planning Commission, right? So there would for sure be meetings with the Planning Commission. often they start as information or discussion before they would go to an action item. Then it would get referred to the Board of Trustees as either a discussion or, an information item. So you're still talking now, the board meets every 2 weeks. So things can happen a little faster with them than does the planning commission. But once they decide, you know what, we're ready for legal to write an ordinance, then we determine the date that we will have the public hearing where we can publish it so that it meets that rules as well. So I think great case scenario, you might be able to get something done in like 3 to 4 months. That would be the political will's been built up. You've got a consensus in the community. The planning commission is on board, and all of us have done our homework that we need to do to answer the questions that come up. And often these hearings are continued because it gets complicated. So again, it just depends on the scope of the ordinance change and whether or not another board has to be involved, and then that public noticing piece.
Okay. So I would think then that the more we can flesh out once we've gone through the initial vetting process, exactly how the committee weighs in on certain things, this might be an advantage as kind of an ad hoc advisory committee. Hopefully, if we were to send our notes in as these hearings are going on, they'd be factored in. Is that right? Well,
Yeah.
Sorry, I was putting another log on the fire. Literally. So, but yeah,
okay.
may it could work out that way. I mean, a lot of this is fluid because we're doing things so differently, and a lot of it's just unfolding. So I wouldn't get caught up too much in, what's going to be, how exactly is this going to look like when we're through this process? Because I think there, are still things that are unknowns. And, we'll see how I think getting the public weigh-in comment is going to be really fascinating.
Agreed.
Just like this process has been. So you guys have about 15 minutes. So I just want to make sure that everybody has said what they wanted to say, and May has what she needs to finalize the document and then send it back out to the full committee again one more time to look at.
Yep, I have it here, and I'm gonna read through it a couple more times, but I think everything's in there that we talked about. So I'll send it out, and you guys get back to me, and hopefully Atashna will feel better, and she'll be able to consider it also. And then I'll get you the document out, Miranda, on Monday. You need it on Monday?
Yeah, Monday, ideally by 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sound good to everybody?
May, just thank you for all the work you put in on this. I think, from all of our previous conversations, I think you've gleaned the best parts, and I'm personally very happy with I think it's very lofty.
Yeah. Well, it is. But
and it needs to be. It needs to be. So,
yeah.
Well, and remember, Kayla, it's what you want it to look like in 2030, right? So going to that, you're showing the top of the mountain at 2030. Yeah. So it's okay.
Well,
that's awesome.
Yeah. I said lofty.
You did.
Yes. Here we are. Huh? I'm not going to say it. High in Netherlands.
Well,
we are indeed.
To get to the mountaintop, though, there's a lot of work to do between today and 2030. And things change. When I think about where we were, think about everybody, think about where we were 10 years ago and how the mentality of this community and so many things in this town have changed in 10 years. The change is going to be exponential. And the process for us is to also be very aware of the fact that external pressures on our town, whether it's traffic, population, pollution, environment, all of these things that are coming towards us, that we have to decide how we want to react to them, are the decisions that we're trying to make now is where we think our town and what it's going to look like in 10 years. We have to put in the work now because the world is changing faster and faster every day, and some of it's good and some of it's not so good. So while we have the opportunity and the ability to make the choices, that will determine who and what we are. God, what a load of crap that was.
Thanks, Kayla.
Thank you.
Ron, did you have any last thoughts before we sign off?
No last
No,
thoughts.
I just think it's great. I'm sorry, Ron, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm happy with it. So
Me too.
There you go.
I think all the committees I've been on have been awesome, and this one is probably the most challenging. And but I think we really have a great cross section of what that top of the hill view needs to include. So it's been a pleasure, guys and ladies. So I guess um, I'll get this out to you in a few minutes, and then we'll take it from there and wait for our instructions on the charrettes. Or that'll be at the meeting on Tuesday,
Yeah,
right?
we'll talk about that on Tuesday.
Right. And you were going to send that out maybe on Monday. Isn't that right, Miranda?
Yeah, Monday night, probably by 9 o'clock at the latest, I'll have everything sent out to everyone to look over before we meet.
So Miranda, the information you're going to send us on Monday, are you including what each one of the groups has come up with for the meeting on Tuesday?
Yeah. The hope is that we keep the discussions to no more than 10 to 15 minutes per group. So I'd like people to look over everything ahead of time. It'll be all the goals and objectives to get feedback like we did on the vision statements. And then we'd like to commit the last 30 minutes to talking about the various ways in which public feedback can be gathered.
But you can send us each a copy of what each group has come up with on Monday. So we'll have a chance to look it over before the meeting with everybody on Tuesday.
It'll be in the PowerPoints that I send out. All the information will be, I'm pulling it together for the PowerPoint.
Okay. And that's on the 30th. I get my second shot on the 30th. So barring any complications, I hope I'm hearing the second shot gives everybody puts them through a bit of a ringer. So, yay.
You're supposed to have Benadryl on hand. Is supposed to help. I don't know.
Okay. Good call.
Not sure. It's a good thing to have around no matter what.
Right.
I guess I have a question for Miranda and Karen real quick, because we're almost out of time. But let's say I look at the goals of the Sustainability Committee, and there's all kinds of stuff about how housing needs to be built or something. And I think, oh, wow, that's really going to impact, the cross-pollination here. Would it be appropriate for a written exchange between committee members? And would that happen before the charrettes start? Because if we only have a little bit of time and we only have a few hours really to review, although I guess most people have their stuff up in the Google Docs folder. Kayla, do you get onto that Google Docs folder?
I don't know. I'll have to ask.
Maybe Miranda could send you that link, and or I can send it, because I know our one for arts and education is up, And Deb's finalizing the one for public engagement and also the composition of our committee. And so
Well,
those two are,
one would hope that in the end, we have, you know, I think of it like bumper cars at an amusement park. We are bumping into, you know, what we're doing now needs to have a very large public engagement process about it. So that's public engagement. The sustainability people are going to have things that they want in the, maybe they want code changes, maybe they want certain things done. So a lot of that might, you know, spill over into what I'm assuming it should spill over, transportation or whatever. So I think there's going to be a lot of crossover between. There should be a lot of crossover between us all.
well, I guess I'm still thinking,
but not to the point where we have to rewrite the documents. It's just we're going to augment one another, hopefully.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
that's what
Kayla, I'm wondering too. I mean, given what you just said, Miranda and Karen, forgive me if I should know this already, but we're going to meet on Tuesday with the full committee. Everybody's going to have their stuff done. At that point, let's say that we do find a lot of things we want to kind of try to line up between the committees, or do we wait until it sounds like the major interaction with the public is the first one, and it would make sense to me to have a coordinated kind of vision across the subcommittees before we put that out there. So, is there a process for that if that becomes the case?
Well, so if there's any changes to be made, everyone has until Friday morning, next Friday, the 2nd, to make any adjustments. I would argue that you should continue to kind of keep these separate in an effort not to overwhelm the public. So let me just for the sake of while we're here, I'm going to share with you. So this is the calendar that we're playing off of in terms of the charrettes. And so as you see, there are numerous opportunities to give feedback. And I don't want to stay on this for too long because it's still a draft. But there are numerous ways to give feedback. So you have advisory boards and commissions, external stakeholder meetings, in-person charrettes, virtual charrettes, the ability to stop by town hall, using a program called Gather Town, which is kind of an avatar-like program. We're also going to make a YouTube video that allows people to give feedback on YouTube and to share the link on Facebook and other social media sites. And so the reason I say to keep it separate is that we want to have a dedicated night that's just for housing. So you may have members of the community who, for whatever reason, don't care a lot about the other topics, but are very passionate about housing. And so allowing them to have a night where we can just dive into housing with this subcommittee is the reason why we still kind of want to keep it separate. You don't want to go too far into melding everything together because you don't know how the community is going to respond and they may not be in full support. So it makes sense to keep things still separate through the month of April.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I certainly have not had time to go into the other subcommittees yet. And I don't know about anybody else, but okay. Well, is there anything else that before we call it a night?
No, I just want to say thank you for all the work everybody's put in on this.
Yeah, Kayla, same here. I know you've been working hard. Ron, I know you have. Miranda and Karen, and I know Atashna's given a lot of her time and heart and soul into this. So it's been a great effort and ongoing. So thank you very much, and talk to you soon.
Talk to you Tuesday.
Yeah, for sure. Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night, all.
Night, Ron.
Night. Bye.
Bye-bye.